Welcome to the Charity Lounge, and I'm happy we're having this once again. The last episode we had Gospel, but we had him for a very short time, and a lot of people have been saying, "Oh, Tolu, when are we having Gospel again?" Now we've brought Gospel back. Gospel is here with us again. Hi, Gospel. How are you?
Hi, Tulu. Thank you so much for having me again.
You're welcome, and thanks for coming because I didn't even expect that you were going to say yes to me, but then thank you.
Thank you for having me. Really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And this is a great space, actually.
Thank you. So again, the last time we're talking about fundraising and funding your causes or your charities or your ideas. And that is a very big issue. And that's why we're discussing it again, especially because of the aid cuts. So there's the freeze in grants, there's the AIDS court, there's a whole lot happening. Yeah. And this is also a time where people like me, a lot of smaller charities are getting opened up to funding, information about funding and all. So I'm like, Tolu, what would happen to you now that you want to jump into that, ocean of getting grants and funding? There's this whole thing that this is almost reducing. How do you think small charities like mine can thrive in the midst of all of this?
Well, thank you very much, Tolu. I mean, it's really good to be here again, like I said earlier on. And these conversations are very timely and the right conversations to have in the times we live in particularly. There are major issues happening right now globally. Mm-hmm. And the world has never been in the place of uncertainty as it is now. We've seen, Trump literally shutting down USAID.
Yeah.
In January, the UK, Charities has sort of cut down on international aid budget by almost 40%. Germany, France, the EU in general have technically halved their aid support. On some form of conversation, the goal is sort of reinvest in defense as geopolitical tensions are also increasing and growing in a sense. And that's also informing what we term as geoeconomics. That means how countries are also responding from an economic front. In terms of the impact of geopolitics on local economies or different markets globally. We've also seen the era of, the tariff or the trade wars recently and how that has reformed, the distribution of wealth, the distribution of what goes where and all of that. So basically just saying that the uncertainties in the world have sort of advanced differently now.
Absolutely.
We're in a crunch time when it comes to funding, not just funding, even impact investing in quotes, generally, grants, as a case may be. Many programs across different markets, including Western markets, emerging and frontier economies, have been impacted to a large extent. So I agree with you that as a small charity in the UK or anywhere in the world, you would generally be worried about the times we live in, what opportunities exist out there for us. But again, these times have also evolved with interesting opportunities, and opportunities have actually come to stay in the sense. Now, what the geoeconomic impact of the trade wars and Russia-Ukraine war means also is that they've been increasing inequalities, increasing economic divides as well. People have become more socially vulnerable to things, we've also faced with the cost of living crisis from Russia and Ukraine war. That's still pending. There are still lasting effects from the, COVID-19 pandemic and all that. So the world has become more unequal. Poverty is now literally a mainstay conversation. United Nations have said that they're not sure that 50% of the goals will be achieved in 2030. That's the Sustainable Development Goal. So there's a strong lagging behind across fronts developmentally. Now, in the midst of all of these things, 1, 2, 3 terminologies have been in the conversation. I mean, it's an era of frontline capital, era of patient capital, and it's an era where, the monies are still available. Funders, impact investors, governments are now more interested to ensure that they get to the bottom line or to small charities, basically, who are making that grassroots, change in a sense. So you have a case where prior till now, those monies have gone to big, deep pockets or bigger agencies, bigger agencies who are in the development space generally. And just 2% of that have actually gotten to community organizations or local charities or small charities.
Okay. So now that, for those that are wondering how gospel has been speaking, first is an economist. So all the big grammars and all the breaking down of geopolitical this and that's as a result of what he does, outside of funding and all of that. And if you think about it, really, everything connects.
Yeah, very heavily reinforced, yeah.
So if you say that we just have 2% of the funding, or we get 2% of the funding, minorities. Now that there's a court, is there hope,
Yeah.
What are the creative ways? Because I'll say freely, I've been running my charity for 18 years. It's going to be 19 years in June. And a lot of people have come to me to say stuff like, oh, I want to shut down my charity or this good thing that I do. Why? Because I've been funding it from my pocket. Yeah. And many times I tell them creative ways where they can raise funds. You can run, you can do this, you can do that. But if I'm being honest, even for me personally, I've had to raise sometimes £600. I think the most I've raised creatively is about £4,000. But those people, how do they sustain their dreams? Because even the Bible says that the poor will always be in our midst. It's not like there's anybody coming to eradicate poverty. I personally do not believe that would ever happen. We can make the world a better place, but that there wouldn't be poverty, I don't think it would ever happen. But how do we keep our heads up? How do people start to, beyond their pockets, get money to sustain these causes, these good things that they have going?
Thank you very much, Tolu. Yeah, so first and foremost, it has to be a mindset shift. Yes, it has to be a mindset shift. And that's because people have believed, particularly people of color, have believed, again, from our backgrounds as well, that, you're blessed to be a blessing, which is true, which is true. But the challenge with that, in terms of how it's been taught and how it's been lived, people feel and think that they need to make money first before they can then, extend financial support or resource their charitable goals and objectives in the community.
Yeah.
But if you look at what that terminology actually means, what it says is that it goes beyond just your money. It's talking about you being able to strategically think about what you do, position in such a way that you're able to access the right funding you need to scale. Because again, I've spoken to a lot of people who do things from their pocket and they're burnt out. So there's actually a negative, it's sort of like a retrogressive progress that they make when they do that. So people are burnt out, they're tired. So that thing that used to be passion has now become, they're sort of burnt out trying to live out their passion. And that passion is tangible. Legacy is a tangible thing to have, to hold, and to live on, and all of that. And you have to probably start thinking of your legacy way before, whatever happens. So the thing is, people have always thought or believed that they have to use money from their pockets to start their charitable objective. But the goal of this conversation is also to debunk that.
Yeah.
Because with £1, you can maybe assume you can support 3 people with £1. Assume so now. With £100, think of that. You could probably support 300 people with £100 or multiply. So there's always a multiplier effect when you can access more. Yeah. So why do you think you have, in quote unquote, even if you do have more than enough, all right? So there's always the burnt out, the retrogressive impact. That passion is literally subject to time. Just a matter of time, people will begin to retrogress. So there is actually funding, and then people then need to begin to shift their minds in terms of positioning and all that, which we'll go into more detail shortly. In terms of what are the possibilities, opportunities available today in today's shifting global economy or landscape of fundraising. How can people really access the funding that they need? They first need to shift their mind, from where they've always been in terms of it has to be from my pocket.
So sometimes a lot of people now, when I started and even up till now, I think last month we were speaking and I was telling you how I'd written to several people or organizations, and I didn't even get any response. So sometimes people try, but then they don't get response from anybody. It's just tone deaf.
Yeah.
absolute silence, and then they're like, you know what, this thing is not working, it's probably not just for me. But how can people get to the point where, from you, I'm learning a lot, I hope you know that, the language, how you word your proposals and stuff like that, it's not just out there. I would normally just speak as I'm writing a letter or an email to someone without considering the lingua of the funders.
Exactly.
Which is what you're great at. So how do people get to the point where they're not just receiving radio silence from whether a typical funder or an organization that has a CSR department that funds?
Yeah, and that's a very, very interesting, question, and it's something that happens to a lot of us. So first and foremost, to start with, that mindset shift has to happen. And what that simply means is this: you are doing things off the back of your passion, but the funder is not responding to your passion, to start with. All right, so
I hope you heard that. Please say it again.
So most charities or most NGOs or most individuals who try to support people in the community do that or take off from passion. But when you begin to look for funding externally beyond your pocket, whoever is going to give you money would not respond in quotes to your passion. What they're responding is, to a large extent, responding to a need that's been clearly articulated and clearly outlined to their own, aligned rather to their own priorities. So a lot of times it's not about what you want funded, but what the funder wants to fund in the real sense. So people actually go out looking for who will fund their passion, but they miss out because they need to understand that the funders have priorities, they have interest areas, they have terms and conditions, they have eligibility criteria. So there are things the funders want funded. So and sometimes it may be the level of alignment with what you want funded may just differ. All right. So, and many times it's some form of research and all that, but just to take it back, in terms of actionable ways people can begin to think of how to break that. Number one, your charity. What space do you play in? What exactly are you seeking to solve? What problem are you seeking to solve? So people just have that passion, they have that burning desire, and they go all out to start things. Now, interesting, you will gather people, you will solve problems, and all that. But again, it's not strategic.
It's not sustainable.
Strategic will mean whatever problems you want to solve at the grassroots or community level, you must then begin to think of how it can be sustainable. And when you start thinking about sustainability, that means you're then moving from grassroots support to some form of evidence-based work, to some form of systemic change work.
Yeah.
So there has to be a transition across those three lines consistently over a period of time to be able to attract any funder to start with. And then you take that on the second level to say, who are the kind of funders that are interested in the kind of work that I'm doing? Now, for some people, it's okay to start with passion, but if you must be able to raise funding, you now need, safe to say, what we term as a business model for your charity. Okay,
so let me say that for you in another language. Passion starts it, but passion does not sustain it.
Exactly. So you need a business model, not because your charity is a business, but there is now something called charity as a business, in quotes. As, emphasis on the word as a business, not charity is a business.
You know what, Gospel? A lot of people, when they hear charity and business, when you put both side by side, they're like, no, I'm not a business, so I don't want money. We're very quick to say that. But again, I think this is what really puts us in trouble, because we start charity and it's very program based.
Yeah.
We're thinking of the program. Oh, I want to gather 20,000 women. I want to feed them. That is not your charity.
In fact, there are two levels.
That's a program.
That's a program. So there are even two levels to that. You can start anything today and become very programmatic.
Absolutely.
You would not raise a lot of money being programmatic. However, you can start something today and become very systemic in your overarching model of delivery.
Yeah.
And to a very large extent, if you go that route, you would not really be intense on programs. You would rather be intense on systemic change.
Yeah.
And that's the long-term route to be able to raise proper funding. And there are two types of funding. And a lot of people don't know that. There is unrestricted funding and there's restricted funding.
Okay, tell me more.
Unrestricted funding is the funding you access to take care of all of your core costs, which will, be linked to salaries, administrative
Running
costs,
cost,
anything that the cost that pertains to just keeping the lights on to run that initiative or that social enterprise. Those things are called unrestricted cost. And in fact, salaries as well. Paying your own salary, salaries of your staff and all that. You can find all of that within the unrestricted funding block. However, the restricted funding is such that it's tailored to a particular program. It's tailored to a particular project. Now, whilst the global landscape of funding, especially the UK, has evolved recently, you now find more funders looking to actually fund restricted projects. So the search for funding is on two levels. You're looking for funders who still fund the kind of work you do, number one, and then you're looking for funders. Preferably, I would recommend prioritizing funders who fund unrestricted. Because with unrestricted, meaning that you have free money to be able to do advocacy work, do research, drive systemic change, influence government policy towards the space where you play in.
Yeah.
And the question about the space where you play in, again, is something that lots of charities need to think about. So it's okay to have passion, but you also need to put your passion through a test. Ask yourself, if you really want your social enterprise or charity to be sustainable, one of the big questions you need to ask yourself is, are you really solving a problem that exists at scale? Or are you solving a problem that exists in your local community? So if you solve a problem that exists in your local community, which is fine. I mean, at best,
you're community-based.
You'll be community-based. You collect community funding, and you should be happy doing that.
But everybody can be called to a global space.
Of course. So you define your niche basically. But if you really want to, influence change, but think about it now. If number 10 wants to call 20 people involved in education reforms,
would they call you?
I
want to be called.
Do you understand? So, what would make number 10 call you? There's so many people doing work in education, but it's just like saying many are called, you are choosing that kind of stuff. So, but why would a number 10 call you to say, come to the table, let's talk?
So what I see, guys, I'm learning so much. It's not just about funding. Funding is an aspect that keeps your charity running. There's also a place of strategy.
Of course,
there's a place of being influential.
Exactly.
In your space.
Strategically relevant in your space, because you can be influential, but you're not relevant.
Oh my goodness. Oh no.
So,
the gems are just too much. You can be influential but not relevant.
Not relevant.
Wow.
Yeah. And again, the climate also determines what is relevant. What is relevant.
You see, when I say you teach me a lot of things, how this thing is just going in my head, and I'm like, wow.
The climate determines what's relevant, because relevance is also timely. What was relevant last year?
You're still sitting there.
Exactly.
The boat has sailed.
You could be influential, but you're not relevant.
Yeah.
You could be relevant, but you're not strategically relevant, because then your relevance has to be timely enough to be relevant to the person who needs you. You get what I mean? So part of this thing is small charities or people generally need to think, if you really want to really bring about change. I know they say change starts from where you are, but the goal is not to stay where you are, ideally. So you want to be able to think to a large extent, what's the scale of this problem you're solving? What's the depth of the problem? Do a problem tree. Do a problem tree. What are the root causes of the challenge or the problem you're seeking to solve? A lot of charities don't get scientific at that level. Do some research to find out what the root causal.
You know what, Gospel? It just still ties back to the fact that a lot of people think their charity is the program. Your program is an expenditure.
Exactly.
You're spending.
It's an expense, It's a consumption vehicle.
Yeah.
It's a consumption vehicle.
Yeah, because for every project you create or you do, you are spending. Whether the money is from your pocket or from family and friends. It was on this journey I learned that there's donor fatigue.
Yeah, there's donor fatigue. Exactly.
If you keep going to meet the same circle of friends all the time to give you money, they'll get tired. Like, I want to start charity now. If I keep giving you money all the time, who will give you money for my own charity? So there's donor fatigue.
Exactly.
So by the time you get burnt out personally in terms of using your own funds, and then there's donor fatigue from the people you rely on.
Exactly. And then
what then happens?
In fact, there's another level now. by the time you even move past your your close circle to proper funders work, there's also funder fatigue.
Oh, wow.
Because you could, if you're not increasingly becoming relevant, the funder is going to get tired of funding you, because no funder wants to identify. No matter how big, you can find a very big charity and they're not relevant. They're doing good work, but they're not relevant. You get, so the funder would increasingly want to identify with charities who are doing relevant work, timely relevant work. So you could be small, but then you're now doing very timely relevant work, and you'll be attracting big funders to you. And you could be big, and you're doing big good work, but it's tail work. And you will not be able to attract funders, or you realize that funders are pulling away from you.
Yeah.
As a big charity. It happens as well.
Relevance is key. Relevance is key in the space.
Yeah. And that's why, just again, debunk another fire. That's why when people think about fundraising, they think about fundraising from the money angle alone, which is again very flawed. And that's what I'm
hearing now.
Which is again very flawed. It's not just
about money. We've not spoken a lot about
exactly. We've not spoken about, in fact, the money itself. Yeah.
Cash.
Yeah. So 90% or 90% of the fundraising work is a mix of science in your space. You know, when you talk about science in your space, research, understanding what the landscape is, how it's changing, how it's evolving, what's the lingo that is changing. You know, how is government prioritizing what you're doing. So, for instance, if you look at the current Labour Party's manifesto, you know, and even the current policies, that everything is all in line with the top 5 or 6 things that you want to do. So, if you don't work in that area, then you're already so you need to be able to understand where you are placed in the landscape, and that is what the relevance comes in. And then again, understand how the issues in that space is evolving. Now, funders are looking to work with people who are not just looking for the money. And again, which is a challenge with people who are fundraisers. They don't understand the challenge from the landscape bits, but they know how to write the bid.
Yeah.
You understand? Anybody can write a bid. Anybody, think of it, anybody can actually write a bid. But not everybody can actually move or transform a landscape in its sense, and then finding the funding to do that. So it's a lot more strategic work. You have to be much more involved in the challenge. You have to understand the problem, understand the policies, and why have they failed over a period of time. You know, what are the gaps, and how are you positioned to fill those gaps? When you begin to move on those level of nuances, you begin to realize that even the funding in itself, you begin to attract it. And by the way, writing bids are the most reactive things to do in fundraising. Is the least on the pipeline.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. You know, recently I had to go back to reading and going to really study the SDG goals. And you think that if you run a charity, it's a given, you know, but I was like, you know what, let me go and read again and see and actually digest because it informs how you then create systemic change.
Exactly. And in fact, what is systemic change in that space where you're seeking to work in? What does systemic change mean in that space? That's another. So the thing is, to be very honest, this has nothing to do with your professional, whatever, if you really want to run a charity and you want to do it successfully and naturally attract funding, then you need to evolve in that knowledge of what systemic change means.
Can funders reach out to you? For lazy people like me that I just want to...
Yeah, funders reach out to people. Funders also prospect.
So how can you position yourself? So you have to be in that...
You have to get to a point where you are increasingly relevant. And not just increasingly relevant, you have to be visible.
Visibility.
So your relevance has to be visible to the people who need...
Let me just quickly say something about visibility. And I don't know if I'm talking to everybody now, but as you know, I'm Christian. And before, I used to say, by the way, my charity caters to children, underprivileged children in hospitals, slum communities, public primary schools in Nigeria, and you're just underserved children, families, and communities. And I used to say, whatever is louder than the children, I don't want, you know. And I used to just be at the back. I would use my own money, ask for money from family and friends. But recently, I think a few years back, I had a very strong revelation. Now, when I say revelation, I don't mean that I had a vision or anything. I was just reading my Bible and I read that scripture that says something about let your light shine that men may see and glorify your Father in heaven. And I said to myself, if I am hiding at the back, my light is not shining. So you have to be out there, and that, buttresses your point in terms of being visible. You have to be out there because that's one of the ways that you can get the kind of help that you need to get. And that's one of the ways these funders can find you and see that, oh, this person is doing an amazing work. We would like to work collaboratively with this organization.
But there's something again to debunk, Tolu. Visibility. When you talk about visibility to charities or to organizations, it's all about social media, mostly social media, and people knowing or seeing you. But also visibility is also, in my own simple opinion, more strategic than just platforms. So visibility means that if you have unlocked the space you want to play, let's say you want to do work in education, you've identified the gaps, the systemic need, where government is heading, how you want to position yourself, and you're doing grassroots, but you're also positioning. Visibility also means that you could lead an evidence piece of work, maybe a research or something, and then join, for instance, an APPG.
What was an APPG?
An APPG is All Parties Parliamentarian Group.
Okay.
Yeah, and people don't know about the APPG, by the way.
You don't know about so many things. Don't worry.
Yeah, so
even me, I have to go and read up on APPG.
So identify what APPG aligns to your own area of charitable work.
Yeah.
Meetings are usually held a bit regular when you think, in terms of the APPG space, and sometimes usually the House of Lords, House of Commons, or random locations as, determined by the APPG team and all that. Now, when you get into those spaces, and people know you for the work that you're doing, you're probably sharing your research reports, your impact reports. You know, a lot of charities. In fact, people who even do charities from their pocket don't even have impact reports.
I don't.
So where do you want to start from? You get it. So
maybe I shouldn't say that on air, but I don't.
Baseline is an impact report. So even if you're not doing evidence work,
I need to do
to identify. You should. So baseline. So if you have an impact report or something, and you're in an APPG space, you can distribute your impact report. So you need to be. So aside from being visible on social media, you need to be visible to the people who matter the most to your cause.
Yeah, but that's your light shining as well, because you're not just at the back. You're even in little things, and it's not like you said. A lot of people think you shining your light is going on Instagram and speaking to the camera and stuff like that. That's the starting point. You may never get to do that. And how we see some people and you're like, oh, I don't know this woman, but by the time they list what they've done, now you're like, whoa.
Yeah, exactly. So for example, you meet some charities, in terms of visibility now. They know all the ecosystem, people in the ecosystem. That's visibility. The funders know them. So it's one thing for you to know the funders. It's not for the funders to know you.
I think it's better. It's better when the funders know you.
So
because that's
visibility. If you look at the charities on the front line of things now, check out their social media pages. They're probably just giving you, just the tip of the iceberg of what's going on. You just have to do social media for social media. Yeah. But the real thing that moves the needle,
is
it's done.
Closed doors.
It's done. So visibility has to be closed door visibility, and also normal external open platform visibility and all that. So people need to understand both. How do you build visibility as a small charity? I think it's both a science and an art.
I don't think this is the end of our session, though,
because
we have plenty topics coming every time. Honestly, gospel. Every time we speak, I always have to go back. Like, I don't have my notes here because, of course, I'm in front of the camera. But every time I speak to gospel, I always have a note and a pen to write stuff down. And please, guys, stay relevant. Influence doesn't equate relevance. Relevance is key. I think that's my take home from our conversation today. And even in shining your light, in being out there, be visible to the people that matter. There are over millions of people on social media. I'm sorry, but then it's not everybody that will do much for you. But then even in being visible on social media, also stay visible to the people that matter. Again, for me, another take home for me today is this. I want the funders to know me. I'll know them too, but then I really want them to know me so that they can find me then and then fund my charity and my causes. So I don't believe this is the end of interviewing, bringing gospel to the charity lounge, because as you can see, as you've heard yourself, there's so much to give. Gospel is just a ball of amazement. So thank you once again for coming today, Gospel.
Thank you for having me, Tunu.
Do you want to drop another gem before we go?
No, I just think people should be very encouraged in the times we live in. The opportunities are there for funding. Safe to say that funders I've interacted with are looking to support more people at the community level. But doesn't mean you're doing grassroots work, but people at the community level. So more independent charities like yours.
Yeah.
So, and in some cases, they don't know where to find them. So the onus is then on the charity to lead on the front line. There is a movement of money towards frontline causes now, which means you as the individual who needs the fund to do meaningful work in your community.
Yeah.
So there's more monies going there now, and that's the opportunity in the landscape we are faced with. But again, people need to be properly positioned. If you really want to go far doing charity work, you need lots of resources. So you need to have a strategy team. You do strategy as proper strategy. And take off the, sorry to say, emotional element of what you're trying to do, and then think of it as strategy in terms of how you're able to scale value and scale impact. And again, there's this thing called impact metrics. People should be able to identify what impact means for them at the end of the day. And not just solely for you, but what funders also consider impact in your own space. So how do you know that? Just go on Google, shortlist the funders who work in your space, go on their website, read up on the things they fund, read up on their funding priorities, on what impact means to them. It's only on their website. Then there's this platform called 360-degree giving. Most funders who have funded people always shortlist the names of the people they funded on that platform. So you can also go there, read the kind of projects that have been funded by a particular funder you're looking at, to understand the language and the nuances that sort of attracts the funding from that funder. And then, be creative about it. Be creative about everything you do. So, for instance, a charity who does work in climate change, you can't compare that to someone who does work in something else. So you have to weigh. And when you're going to market, in charity there's also go to market, not just in business. There's go to market. So when you're going to market as a charity person, you need to be able to also understand that some level of ambiguity is good, and you might be at risk being too niche. So you need to be flexible, but also need to be able to. You need room to take on more. You get what I mean? You need room to take on more. Just like the place in the Bible where, the prophet had prayed for the woman and he said, "Go and get more jars." So it was when the jars stopped.
Extend your
that
capacity.
The oil stopped. So extend, create room for more. Create room for more. And because if you believe you're going to do good work, then start off creating room for more. Don't get to a point where you're fixated and then you now need to struggle with charity commission or something to then create the room for more. So people need to be very ambitious with their charitable work. Particularly Black and Asian community, particularly Black people, we also on the ask from funders. We're not saying you overly ask for what you don't need, but place your ask confidently. Don't ask for peanuts, because the funders are there to give you the money to do the work. But then again, they want to ensure that those monies are going into reputable causes. So if you design yourself already in that space, then ask for proper money. You need to do proper work. Put yourself on the budget, put yourself on the salary, standardize everything you do. Use Bright HR and all these guys. Get a proper accountant,
excellence.
Do proper work, and then aim very high. Ensure you go for those APPG meetings. Be in the small 15-man committee at the House of Lords, House of Parliament, and all that. Be in the room. Don't just go there and take pictures. Have conversations. Share
conversations.
Exactly. Intelligently add to the conversation. Always bring your lens. If you're a Black-owned charity founder or an Asian-owned, always bring your lens to the table, because the policy stakeholders need more lenses, more differentiated lenses to make proper decisions to foster inclusion in the UK society. So part of the inequities we find is not because the government doesn't want to do stuff that is equitable to all, but the government doesn't have access to differential data, frontline relevant intelligence to be able to weave the policy in such a way that it's equitable to all. So rather than shouting on social media and just dropping comments on Twitter and all that, if you're really doing your work, get into the spaces where you're able to contribute to the policy communique, the policy briefs, and you're able to also attend the PMQs, be a member of a political party. It's not about taking sides on social media. Attend the party conferences, get an exhibition stand, talk about what you do to corporates and all that. Big corporates, big charities play this game and they play it effectively well. And all that. It's what they call government relations. Learn about it. So if you do it well, at the end of the day, to a large extent, that thing you call passion can end up becoming legacy even before you're 50, even before you're 45. Legacy doesn't have to start when you're getting old, I've made all the money, and you are trying to see what you can. No. Legacies can start from 15, from 20, from 21. And you have the opportunity to also work in your legacy, live in your legacy, not just in your conventional job and employment space.
Guys, you've heard it all. Charity Lounge would be bringing more of this to you. It's space for charity owners, people who generally want to do good, people who run and support charities, just spotlighting doing good, no matter the form it's coming. It's just to spotlight, make sure that people are heard, they're seen. And for those that are skeptical about charities to support, especially minority-led charities, Charity Lounge is your place to see, hear, and connect with those charities. See you next time on the Charity Lounge.